Sharing me with. Now, our faith panel today, we have Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence, a Jewish educator and a faith consultant, great friend of the show, and Sita Lakdani, a Hindu tutor at Eton College, who's joined us before. Let me outline what we're going to be talking with them about. The headline read, Ugly Obituary War breaks out after disowned son responds to family's glowing tribute to late firefighter dad by publishing his own obituary that branded him a terrible father. So this was about a chap called James Becker. The writer, Timothy McLaughlin, responded to this obituary about his dad. And I'm going to pick out the bits that I want to highlight. He refers to the original glowing obituary. And then he says, look, I want to answer this. He said it was accurate, saying that his life, one of the things that his life he most valued was his religion as a Jehovah's Witness. But it failed to mention to what extent. This included disowning and shunning his adult son, Timothy, when he chose to leave that faith in 2013. It mentioned him as one of the surviving children, but it says, he goes on to say, it failed to mention that my father James, my mother Muriel, my older brother Jimmy, and my twin brother Jared, along with their cherished wives, have had no meaningful contact with me for over a decade, as required per the shunning policy of the Jehovah's Witness faith. None of them even contacted me when my father died. He found out secondhand. He married another man. He's obviously in a gay relationship. He said he never reached out to contact him, never even got to know him or the cherished little boy that they adopted. He said because he has faiths and beliefs that differ from theirs, they've been shunned. So finally, I must say that despite all the hurt they've caused, that his life is full of love and happiness and that the loss is truly theirs. So my question to you is, somebody who's been shunned for years and years and years because they chose not to have the same faith as the rest of their family. Do you think that was okay for him to write his own obituary for his father? He does say, thank you to all of you who've offered condolences, that his life is full of love and happiness. And despite the complicated circumstances, he says about his dad, despite the complicated circumstance, we are grateful for you. So, Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence, what are your thoughts about that obituary?
So, hi, Trisha, and thanks so much for having me back. Early in my experience as a rabbi, one of the great members of my congregation who had been a phenomenal contributor to welfare in the community passed away. And I sat down with his wife and daughter the evening after he passed away and said, it must be a devastating loss for you. And the wife actually said to me, you need to realize, Rabbi, for the last 40 years, I've been the community widow. And for the last 40 years, she had never had her husband home. He'd always been out doing this and that in the school, in education, in the old age homes, and wonderful things. And she just needed to say that. Now, obviously, there's a world of difference between the eulogy that you've been presenting and this case. But it was really important for the wife and indeed the daughter to be able to express to me as something of a home truth. The way we remember people isn't just, the way they were, but it's the way they were with us and the relationship that we had with them. So I'm not averse to somebody putting for their own need a clarification or an understanding about the relationship that was. And, personally, and I've seen this, I have seen parents cut off children. I have come across a case where a grandchild went up to his grandmother in the street and said, "Hi, Grandma, how are you?" And the grandma turned around to the kid in front of her daughter, the kid's mother, and said, "I don't know who you are." And can you imagine the shock and the pain that came with that. Now this was based on a sort of it's one of those, it's the principle of the thing matters, and it had some sort of religious justification, but it wasn't really there. How terrible it is to shun and spurn and turn people away and to weaponize relationships in that way. So I truly do feel that we learn a lot from people's lives and their deaths. And in the same way as sometimes we might be turning somebody into a saint without realizing the harm that they've done to their family on a just never being their level, or the imagination that somebody's got strong religious principles as, in this case, a Jehovah's Witness, but it could have been so many other religions, understand how the religion had been weaponized and how the relationship had been poisoned and the suffering that had come through a lack of sensitivity. Maybe I'll get to that with my dinner guest, but the lack of sensitivity is something that I think was very important to put out there. And it's not so much a matter of defaming the dead or speaking ill of the dead, which I understand is a bad thing to do. It's about speaking truth to the relationship and truth to the way it and the religion has impacted upon us.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a break, and after the break, I'm going to ask Sita Lekdani the same question. You and Trisha Goddard here on TalkTV, looking at all sorts of things, the news, but looking through a very different lens with our faith panel at the moment. The story about the son that countered a glowing obituary about his father by pointing out that because of the father's Jehovah's Witness shunning, he said, process as required, and shunning, the son came out and said, he had no contact with me. He completely cut me off for over a decade. He still ends the obituary with love, but says that the dad didn't meet his partner or his son or anything else, and the pain that caused. Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence has told us how he feels. We're now going to Sita Lekdani, a Hindu tutor at Eton College. Sita, what are your thoughts on this obituary?
So I understand the son's perspective, because obviously he's been through a tremendous amount of pain, and there's something within his heart which he needs to sort of let out, because if you kind of bottle it up, it can cause a lot of harm to yourself. However, having said that, Hinduism, from a Hindu point of view, what we say is that life is incredibly jagged, life is harsh, and there are all sorts of very painful situations which are inevitable in all of our lives, whether it comes in the form of, a very difficult relationship with a parent, or it could be anything like that. So what Hinduism would say is that rather than letting outside circumstances dictate our inner temperament, our inner sort of feelings and emotions, what Hinduism would strongly encourage is to try and develop strategies within ourselves in which we can develop a tremendous amount of inner strength. Because at the moment, the way that we all live our lives is very much the case that, whatever is going on around us seems to dictate our behavior, our mentality, our makeup. So what Hinduism would say is, let's try and reverse that. Let's make ourselves the master, rather than everything around us being the master and dictating to us our temperament, our behavior, our circumstances. So it's a difficult journey. It's much easier said than done. And that's why within Hinduism, we offer things like yoga and meditation, mindfulness, trying to keep a control over the mind, because the mind can be very, very difficult to keep a handle on. But if we are able to gain some level of control over ourselves, we can gain some level of peace within ourselves, because the inevitability of life is that life is harsh. Life is hard. And if we can develop strategies within ourselves to develop that inner strength, then that is a great thing to try and foster and develop within ourselves.
So see that if it came to writing, and I'm not sure within the Hindu faith if you would write an obituary, if the rest of your family said, yes, this man is fantastic, it's wonderful, it's gorgeous, And even though you maybe had come to terms with it, because at the end of this, he says that his life is full of love and happiness, that the loss is truly the family's. But he says, thank you. He says, despite the complicated circumstances, that he's still grateful for his father's life. So within Hinduism, would that, an obituary like this, painting the full picture of the hurt, but saying, look, we still love you, we're still grateful for you, would that be acceptable? Because it kind of sounds like he did come to terms with if he still can remember his father with love despite all of that.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I think the wonderful thing is that love is the sort of the conclusion of it all, even though, all these life relationships are incredibly complicated. They're not as straightforward as we would like them to be. But if we can underline that with that essence that, there is love there at the end of the day, even though there may have been arguments and challenges or difficult circumstances to deal with, and it may cause us a tremendous amount of hurt. If we can sort of, be greater than all of that, then we are showing some level of mastery within ourselves that actually I can turn this negative into a positive. And at the end of the day, I see this relationship as being one of love, and I see it in the best possible light that I can. And when that person has departed, when that person is no longer with us, I think that's the best way to handle it, because we don't want to think of that person in a bitter way, even though they may have caused us a tremendous amount of hurt. But having love underlying that relationship is a beautiful thing. Being great enough within yourself to have that love, being a positive relationship with that person despite all of the challenges that they may have faced.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to move on to our next question. Orthodox Easter is celebrated today, and Rabbi, you can feel free to correct every mispronunciation I'm about to make. It's also called Pascha, and the term Pascha for Orthodox Easter, it's derived from the Greek Pascha, which itself comes from the Hebrew word Pesach.
Pesach.
It's going to Pesach. There you are.
Pesach.
That's why I love this. Pesach. It's the Jewish festival of Passover. Now, the Last Supper of Jesus is associated with the Christian Eucharist, and that's believed to have been a Passover meal. So my question is, the ultimate supper or dinner, if you could be at a dinner party, Rabbi, or a supper or whatever, and invite someone from the past, the present, the future, whoever, someone you might have disliked what they stood for, or someone that you think is absolutely amazing, anybody at all, to sit down and have a really deep, meaningful conversation with them, who would that person or those people be?
So with apologies to Kate, who has invited me for dinner this evening, I've no idea if she's watching now, who will be a fantastic host. In the event I needed to choose somebody I'd really love to sit at a table with, I think the great Talmudic sage called Hillel, who lived around 2024 years ago. So he was the preeminent sage in Israel at the turn of the millennium. He came originally from Babylon, so he came in as an outsider and yet rose to the top of the Jewish religious establishment. He was somebody who taught values of pursuing peace. He always listened to the other opinion before he spoke, which is definitely really important to the dinner table, but also if you're having meaningful discussions and debates. He was somebody who always championed the underdog. And thanks so much for having Martin Hibbert on before and listening to his inspirational words about how people who are differently abled have to cope in society. So Hillel was somebody who championed the underdog, and he taught, number one, in the Jewish tradition, the idea, do not do that which is distasteful to you, to another person. And he also taught the very famous maxim, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I, or what am I? And if not now, when? So he was very much a person, a teacher of relationships and building ongoing, strengthening relationships, bringing people together. And at this time, with everything that's going on in the world, Hillel's counsel, a Jewish leader under Roman occupation, Hillel's counsel is the voice I would like to hear how we should relate to people around us.
Wow, wow. I love that. Sita, who would your guest be? Who would you want to sit down with and really find out how they tick and what they have to say?
Well, my dad has always been my inspiration and guiding light, so I would always want my dad to be with me. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a very spiritually oriented household. And the person who my dad particularly turned to for spiritual knowledge and guidance and enlightenment was somebody called Swami Vivekananda, who lived about 100 to 150 years ago. And he went to America and he presented these ideas of yoga and meditation to America and to the UK. And it was tremendously well received. People thought, oh, what is this religion? What is Hinduism all about? They didn't really know 100 to 150 years ago what it was all about. And there was a Parliament of World Religions in Chicago, and they sort of decided to showcase what all the world religions were all about. And Swami Vivekananda was invited as the Hindu representative, and he really stole the show because people were not expecting such tremendous power which can come from the spiritual teachings of Hinduism, because the kinds of teachings he presented were the divinity within everyone. Everyone has a spark of the divine within them, which means that there is tremendous inner strength within us, which we are not even aware of. And that can help us on our life's journey. And another very beautiful message that he presented was the idea of religious pluralism, which essentially means that all religious pathways ultimately are equally valid. They all lead to the same destination. And it's such an important message for the world today. I think Swami Vivekananda was very much ahead of his time, because look at the world today, look at the amount of conflict in the name of religion. If we can apply the beautiful principles that he presented to us, look at the divinity within all human beings, and also to recognize and give equal validity, equal dignity to all religious pathways, how much better the world would be, what a better place the world would be. So I would feel completely privileged and honored to meet a tremendously powerful individual like Swami Vivekananda. And something else which I would very much like to say is that when this unknown monk of India stepped up onto the world stage, the first things he said was, "Sisters and brothers of America." And you might think, oh, that's just, nothing special about that. It's just a bit of a variation on ladies and gentlemen. But you'll be amazed to hear what happened. As soon as he said those simple words, the whole audience did a standing ovation and they were clapping non-stop for 2 minutes. And it seems like, why? I mean, what he said wasn't particularly special at that particular point. Why did people stand up and applaud him? And the reason I really feel is because he carried such tremendous spiritual potency within himself, and his words, in a way, are a vessel of that spiritual power. So as soon as he stood up to speak, that spiritual power knocked people out. They stood up and they couldn't help themselves. They stood up in a standing ovation. So I think he's an incredible individual who many people may not have heard of, but in fact, he had a tremendous impact on people like Barack Obama. He actually met John D. Rockefeller, he met Nikola Tesla, he met William James, and they were all completely inspired by this unknown monk of India. And I think it would be wonderful if more people were aware of him and his message.
Thank you, Sita. Just say his name again really slowly and clearly so we can, for those of us who aren't Hindu, we can hear his name.
Yes, his name is Swami Vivekananda.
Swami Vivekananda. I hope I said that correctly. Thank you so much. Thank you. Rabbi, I thank you once again. I'm sure your dinner with Kate will go wonderfully, despite you not selecting her. I'm sure she'll let you off with that. And Sita, thank you so much. That's our faith panel.